welcome everybody. My name is Jennifer Reiter-Cook. I am an adjunct professor, lecturer, student teacher supervisor with the University of San Diego. My full-time job is I am a senior director of school development for the California Charter Schools Association. So I've been at CCSA for 9 years. But I'm a graduate from the University of San Diego, my master's in special ed and my doctorate in leadership studies. So I have always been involved with continuing to support student teachers all through the years. So that's been my connection to the classroom and staying in touch with what's happening. My husband is a teacher at a high school level and a football coach. My son is currently an incoming sophomore at the University of San Diego, and my daughter will be starting her freshman year of high school this upcoming year. So lots of lenses that I hope to bring to the table for you. I do want to try to spend about half of our time together in breakout rooms, analyzing some different, not only resources, but a lesson plan. But really the purpose for today is for you to be able to support your student teachers. And I'm not necessarily thinking I'm going to teach you anything new, right? And you're like, well, then why am I here? But really what I'm trying to do is present, maybe give you different ways to ask questions, different resources that you can share with student teachers. You all have a wealth of knowledge. And so really it's about thinking about things maybe just through a little bit of a different lens or from a little bit of a different angle to support your student teachers in inclusive settings. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they have a student with a significant disability in a general education classroom. It could be inclusiveness with English language learners. It could be inclusiveness with a diverse set of learning abilities in the classroom, right? So it's not just about, fully including that one student who may have a disability. I'm kind of looking at it from a larger place than that. So I'm not sure how many are in this group right now. I can't see that, but
we've got about 18, including you and I.
Okay, great. So it's a smaller group, which is great. So, I'm okay. Do they have the ability to take themselves off mute?
I believe so.
Okay. If you do have, Scott, can you say something? It looks like you took yourself off mute, just so I can see.
Good morning, Jennifer.
Oh, great. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So if you want to just jump in and interrupt me or ask a question, I'm fine with that. This is not, this is for all of us to collaborate and learn. But also the chat's being monitored, so feel free to jump in the chat as well. But really for us today, the expectations for us just as a group, just be fully present and engaged with us, because we're all going to learn from each other. Make sure when you're in your breakout rooms, especially if someone hasn't had the opportunity to speak, that you kind of raise up their voice and see if they have any input or anything to share. And if they don't, that's fine too, but just let's make sure we'll try to be equitable. Actively participate. So breakout rooms only work if you talk to each other. So make sure when you're in there, you're actively participating. Have an open mind. So even like I said, if you have seen this all before, and you may have, it may be a different resource, it may be a new way of looking at things. So think of it in that way as well. Is there anything else I'm missing? Feel free to put it in the chat or take yourself off mute if you have any expectations for how things will go today. All right, hearing or seeing none. I do want to just sort of jump into some shared language and talk about some different resources that I have for these. So when I supervise student teachers at the University of San Diego, they need to submit a lesson plan before their lesson, and then we do the observation. So I do review their lesson plan, and I look for alignment with what they're doing in their actual observation with their lesson plan. But probably more of the richness of conversation comes from what actually happens in the classroom, right? So there are different resources and ways that I ask questions of student teachers again, regardless of whether they have, someone with a significant disability in their classroom or not. But these are some different ways in which we frame the questions in terms of trying to get to what is the most effective way of teaching your students. And I do supervise ed specialists and general education teachers. So I feel, I felt that these kinds of questions have been applicable to both of those environments. So any thoughts, again, in the chat, or take yourself off mute? And sorry, I just, do they have the resources as well right now or no?
I believe they do. I can share the folder.
Okay, that'd be great. So there's 4 links, one for each one of these questions. So, okay, so this is the inclusion resource. Any thoughts? I don't know if you probably haven't had a chance to really look through this thoroughly, but when you hear inclusive education, what does that mean to you? What do you think of? What kinds of questions do you ask your student teachers about that? Does everyone have access to content? Yes. And you're going to see a lot of overlap too with Universal Design for Learning resource. How will all students grow? Yes. Really important. And I see this in the charter school sector as well, where we're looking at performance versus growth, right? So how do all students grow? How do we know that they're making progress individually versus what's their sort of snapshot performance piece? Anything else? How will I provide students access? Yes. And even beyond access is how will students be able to process and meet the high standards in your classroom, whether it's the state standards or whether it's the standards in their IEPs if they do have more significant disabilities. But I like this resource because there is a case study at the end. Again, when I see student teachers maybe not having a lot of experience in an inclusive classroom or just with a diverse set of students in terms of demographics, I like to give them real life examples and then things that they can take into their next lesson that we observe and that we talk about. So there's a case study in this one that I think is really nice for student teachers to see and look at, especially if they're not ed specialists, if they're in a general education classroom. So this is a really great resource to have. And it also, this visual here is also a really nice snapshot of inclusion. How will all students get opportunities to cognitively engage in the learning? Yes, super important that all students are somehow engaged, right? So one great example I have that always sticks in my mind from my own classroom was when I started the inclusion program at my school, and I took a student with significant disabilities into my 4th grade general education classroom, and they were doing, they were making relief maps of California. And so they had to, accurately put the mountains and the desert and the ocean and all of that. And the student with significant disabilities was accessing that content, but she also actively participated by being the one in the group who painted all of those pieces on that relief map. So, she had to know the ocean was blue and the deserts were yellow and all of that. And her peers had to help support her in that. So she was learning that content and participated in the way that was most beneficial to her and to the rest of the group. I think I have to stop share and reshare to go to each reference, but the next one is the Universal Design for Learning. And this has a lot of definitions and a lot of terms that have sort of shifted and changed over the years, but any thoughts on UDL, or let me know in the chat if your university utilizes UDL lesson plans, anything like that, anything around UDL that you can share, and I'll bring up the resource. Any thoughts on UDL or your experience with it or how you use it with your student teachers? Okay, so, oh, was someone going to say something?
I think UDL is all about including every student and believing that every student can really learn, and coming up with as many approaches as we can to help them all do that.
Yep.
Now,
So
I think we model that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We have to challenge our student teachers to think about that, how they can have all students at the same time actively involved in that lesson and learning what they need to learn from the objectives. Setting high expectations and making sure all students can meet them, absolutely. And students are going to meet them in different ways, right? So this document talks about those high expectations that you just mentioned, Scott. Low floor, high ceiling, great. So, you know, the ability for us to, and I still use maybe terms that have shifted over the years, but the process, content, product, for me, it makes a lot of sense. And one of the things in this document, it talks about starting small. And that's exactly what I did when I was a teacher. And that's almost always the conversation I have with my student teachers is don't get over, this can seem so overwhelming and like, how can you be this perfect teacher and do all of this at once? And, you know, it takes time, right? So for me, I found that the easiest thing to start with was product, right? How can my students demonstrate their knowledge in a variety of different ways? How can they choose how to demonstrate their knowledge? To me, that was the easiest way to start. Someone else may think content is an easier place to start where you know, can differentiate all the different content that students access. But for me, that was the easiest place to start. So, you know, students could demonstrate their knowledge on a particular standard in social studies by creating a PowerPoint or making an infomercial or making a diorama or a video or, you know, whatever you as a teacher decide are the parameters of those choices. So those are the conversations I have with my student teachers when they see and hear this UDL concept and it just seems so nebulous and something like they can't really accomplish because it just feels too overwhelming. So this document is a nice way to introduce that to them in a little more bite-sized way and allows them to think about it in their lesson planning, which is, you know, maybe the first step, but I really like this start small approach. It just helps them understand that you can start in pieces and continue to integrate it into your lessons. The next piece is the accommodations. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what accommodations are or how you share that with your student teachers in terms of thinking about accommodations when they're creating their lesson plans.
Okay, I'm Walt.
Hi, Walt.
I'm a supervisor at Sac State, and with respect to accommodations, I like to have my students think about what we call a hierarchy of support by asking questions with respect to the level of support needed, then I'm working from there. So, for example, can the student do the same lesson as typical periods with the same objectives, using the same materials? If the answer is yes, then they don't need much with respect to adaptations. Perhaps, you know, they may need emotional support.
Mm-hmm.
But if not, can the student do the same activity with adapted materials? So, you know, in math, Gabe completes fewer problems, you know, in language arts, key details are highlighted and so forth. And then we kind of continue on the hierarchy here to other forms of support to students who need, you know, multiple and extensive forms of support, but still can be included.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so perhaps you have a student who has a goal to cooperate with peers and follow directions without losing focus. That may be the goal. So it's helping students to understand that it's not either or, but there are multiple means by which students can be included, and we can kind of look at it as a hierarchy. So even if they need multiple forms of support, they can still be included.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Walt. That was really an excellent summary of what we're talking about and how you can have that conversation with your student teachers as well. So I completely agree. And I also think it's really important for student teachers to understand that accommodations are not modifications, that you're not changing the content or the expectations. You're changing the way in which they interact with that content. And so this document, I don't know if any of you have utilized the Iris Center, but man, this is an amazing resource. And if you have time to, you can go down rabbit holes big time. So make sure you set aside some time if you're going to look at the Iris Center, but it is an amazing resource. I mean, everything from case studies to online activities, resources for student teachers, for yourself. it's just a wealth of, and many, many topics. So do yourself a favor and take some time to go through this. And I'm sure you will find things that you can share with your student teachers. You know, I always share the example of again, I try to share as many examples as I can from my days in the classroom with my student teachers, and it just makes more sense to them. But, you know, for me, it's a simple example of if I gave my 4th grade class, you know, a times table quiz or a test, and I had a student with who had some goals of identifying numbers versus the goal of, you know, knowing their times tables. I would, like Walt just mentioned, can they use the same thing, and can you just ask a different question? So it wasn't a big production. Everybody got the same times table sheet, but the student who had goals to identify numbers, I would give that student, you know, 3 different highlighters and say, I want you to highlight all the 2s in yellow, all the 4s in pink, and all the 6s in green. And they had the same exact resource as all, or same exact, oh, the word's escaping me, the paper assignment as the rest of the kids, but their outcomes were different, right? Because of their goals on their IEP. So, or for a student who isn't able to complete all of the problems that are on that page in a certain amount of time, maybe you just cross off the odd numbered problems and they do the even numbered problems, right? So there are ways to accommodate where you're not changing, or you can change it for one student's outcomes, and it doesn't have to be something that is something that takes hours to create and have ready for the students. But this, Iris, again, take some time to go through this when you can, and also look at the other resources that Iris has, because like I said, I mean, all of these include links, and you can go into different activities and examples, and it's just so helpful and a really, really great resource.
Jennifer?
Yes.
I do a lot with accommodations and modifications with my student teachers,
Yes.
because I too do both regular ed and special ed. And when I talk to my regular ed student teachers, I explain accommodations as physical and environmental changes that do not affect their assessment goals.
Yep.
Okay, and you give the example of using a sound field for someone who is hearing impaired, or you use larger text for someone who is visually impaired.
Yes.
So I break it down that way, and then we do a whole thing on modifications, which is a whole different animal.
Yes, that's great. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, and it is really helpful to give those concrete examples. Or even if it's a student who has a visual impairment and needs an accommodation of, you know, if they're in high school, in every class they go to, they need to sit in the front row, right? So they can see the whiteboard or see the document that's being projected or whatever, right? So those are really clean, sort of simple, you know, we all know things get more complex, but you know, those are nice ways to kind of just have student teachers wrap their heads around what you're talking about.
Can I add something, Jennifer?
Yes, please.
We talk a lot in UDL about input and output.
Yes.
However, we also have to be mindful of the students' engagement based on their motivation. Mm-hmm. So we can do everything right with respect to the output and the input, but still the student will not initiate and engage. So that's another aspect to UDL that is important that we must consider.
Absolutely. And I actually have a really quick example of what you're talking about too. I had a student in my class who I struggled with him wanting to, you know, engage in the work, right? Regardless of what choices I gave him for product or process or anything, right? And so we were writing persuasive essays on, we were studying China, and persuasive essays on where I should, if I were to be a tourist in China, what would I spend my money on? Where should I go? What should I do, right? He was completely not interested in that. So I said, okay, what, I knew he was into skateboarding, and I said, well, write me a persuasive essay following, the structure that we had, on why I should take up skateboarding as a hobby, me, the teacher. Well, he thought that was the most hysterical thing he had ever heard. This is 4th grade, mind you, but still. He thought that was great because he just envisioned me on a skateboard and probably falling down and, breaking my ankle or something, right? But he thought that was the greatest thing. And he wrote a persuasive essay on why Mrs. Cook should be, taking up skateboarding as a hobby on the weekends, right? My goal was the persuasive essay, right? I could assess him on the, the assignment was both social studies and writing, right? But for him, I was just going to assess the, persuasive writing for that. I could assess the social studies piece in a different way, right? So thinking creatively, thinking about, okay, if this student's not engaging, how do I get them engaged? And so that's, kind of aligns with what you were talking about. So thanks for bringing that up. That's important. Okay, one more document, and then we're going to get into groups. And this one is about effective pedagogy. So this, I'm just going to share the highlights of this, but this is also another really nice document because it talks about what the teacher does in each one of these areas of effective pedagogy. So this is something you could also share with student teachers to help them come up with ideas for what to do in the classroom. So I'm getting a lot of comments on the Iris Center stuff. So I knew that would be popular. So hopefully you'll get a lot out of that. But the effective pedagogy is the joint productive activity. So sometimes we think about the I do, you, we do, you do, you do, we do, right? Like that whole thing. But really, can you find ways, can the student teacher find ways to engage together with the students? Language development, always something that should be present in the lessons. And maybe even some of you are having your student teachers integrate ELD standards into their lessons as well. Contextualization, so making things relevant, putting things in context, whether that's drawing on their prior knowledge or finding other ways to have students contextualize information. Making sure there are challenging activities. I just did a debrief with a student teacher and her cooperating teacher to challenge the student teacher, I think more about how do we also take the activities to the next level for students. And then instructional conversation. I also point out this is similar to like academic vocabulary in the lessons. How are you bringing that into the lessons? How are students using academic vocabulary? I've also done some work with the TPEs and the assessments for those, and there's a lot to look for, or that the credentialing would like us to look for in terms of use of academic vocabulary. So that's also really important. So again, another good resource. You can take the time to look through that yourself and pull out the things that are most relevant to you or to your student teacher. So now what I'd like to do is have us get into groups, and I'm going to show you on here actually what we're going to do real quick, and then we can also put it in the chat so you all will have it in your rooms. I have a link to a lesson plan. If you have that document, it's linked in there, but I would like for you to look at the lesson plan. And this is a lesson plan from a template from the University of San Diego that our student teachers get in their classes. And I want you to think about how the lesson plan ensures that all students are part of an inclusive classroom that promotes growth in their knowledge, skills, and abilities, and what feedback and questions you would provide to the student teacher in order to build on strengths while improving opportunities. You can use some of the resources that we just went over. You can use your own experience, whatever you'd like, but you'll be in the breakout rooms for about 20 minutes. I think we're right on time, which is fantastic. And then those are the parameters of the breakout groups. If we can get the groups close to 5 people, that'd be great. 4 to 5. The person with the birthday closest to today will be the note taker. The person with the first name furthest in the alphabet is the person who will share with the whole group when we come back. Take 5 minutes or so to read through the lesson plan, and then discuss questions 1 and 2. And then we'll come back together and see what we have to share with each other. I'd love to hear, we only have about 6 minutes. I do want to say that I'll be facilitating one of the debrief rooms this afternoon. So if you want to continue the conversation or ask questions or talk about the resources or anything like that, feel free to join me in the debrief this afternoon. But wondering if anybody has anything that's top of mind to share that you noticed in that lesson plan, any answers to those questions, anything that you want to share with the whole group.
I'd like to say that I liked how detailed it was for all the participants there. As a world language teacher, our lesson planning is quite different, the template that we use. And so I thought it was really helpful to have those, to have a space where you have that detail of what the students each needed.
Mm-hmm.
May I join in?
Yes, absolutely.
My concern would be that for the student teacher would be to reduce the amount of ambiguity by providing tests for understanding that are observable and measurable, not enough measurable quantitative data to know. It's mostly qualitative based on observation and very little in the way of measurable, observable results.
Mm-hmm.
Going along with what Walt said, my group also, we were kind of having problems with the assessment. We were wondering like how is she accommodating the assessment to all students throughout the lesson. We were very unclear on that part. And that there was a lot of opportunities for inclusion, but we were not sure that like the why to things.
Yes, great point. Yeah, and those are the things you can have with the conversation too after you actually do the observation, right? So in the observation, you know, I was able to see when she did the closure and they were doing the individual problems to turn in that she actually did have to do some one-on-one with some students to help them through those problems. So, but that's not in her lesson plan. So even thinking about that a little bit more ahead of time about, okay, what if a student, you know, can't do this on their own, or what if they can't do the independent practice, what happens? Those are questions that could be answered. Absolutely.
Another problem would be that there's very little information about every student in the classroom.
Yes.
It's very, very, very incomplete. We don't know virtually anything about the students, with the exception of the student who's a Spanish learning development student. I think SLD, it stands for Spanish learning.
That's a student with learning disabilities. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, there was so little information to go on that we were perplexed with what to do.
Definitely. So this is a lesson from a summer placement where she was actually only in that classroom for 4 weeks, but that would be something I would encourage her to do if it was that longer placement, like a traditional placement. She was in two different classrooms. So one of them, they had to be shorter placements. So absolutely, we'd want more detail there. Yep.
I was sort of looking at the academic vocabulary.
Yes.
Okay, it would have been nice for her to put reviewing the previous academic vocabulary that would go along with this lesson, especially since it is, I mean, even if it wasn't a combo, even if it was just straight 3rd grade, it's still always good to review the previous vocabulary and then go one step farther and to review the previous vocabulary and go one step farther and review some of the vocabulary that has connections with this lesson. So you review, introduce, and preview.
Right. And have them, and doing that within, you know, drawing on their prior knowledge, right? What do you I'm always encouraging my student teachers to have that student-centered approach where they're getting it from the students and then filling in the gaps if they need to. And that's also another way to engage all students, have them talk about that in small groups, come up with definitions, right? And then, you know, share that out with the rest of the group. Great. Again, we can have more time to discuss this if you want to join me this afternoon, but in the chat, or take yourself off mute. I'd love to have you share one word to describe what you learned today or your biggest takeaway. It was a pleasure meeting all of you. I really appreciate how engaged you were in the conversation. Again, I know this is really fast and I feel like I was talking a mile a minute, but happy to engage offline, outside of conference, today in the debrief. Happy to continue to be a community of learners. So place your thoughts in the chat or take yourself off mute, and then I will see you all later this afternoon.